You can replace a mechanic, you can replace a CEO, but you can never replace the one person who truly understands a machine's soul. The laughter rolled across the marina like a warm ocean breeze, blending with the cries of circling gulls and the rhythmic slap of gentle waves against polished hulls. Dozens of luxury yachts shimmered beneath the Florida sun, their chrome railings flashing like mirrors while guests in tailored suits gathered for the biggest product unveiling Whitmore Maritime Holdings had hosted all year. At the center of every anxious conversation rested the crown jewel of the event, a 48-foot Italian performance yacht worth nearly $4 million, scheduled to carry investors on a demonstration cruise in less than 30 minutes. Instead, it sat motionless at the dock, its silent engine becoming more embarrassing with every passing second. One marine mechanic after another leaned over the engine compartment, wiping sweat from their brows, exchanging confused glances, plugging diagnostic tablets into electronic ports, restarting systems, checking fuel pressure, replacing sensors, and trying every modern solution they had learned through years of certification. Nothing worked. The expensive engine refused to answer. Claire Whitmore folded her arms tightly across her elegant white blazer, the wind lifting a strand of her blonde hair as frustration slowly replaced confidence. At only 36, she had transformed her family's marine company into one of the fastest-growing yacht manufacturers on the East Coast, and she had built a reputation for solving problems before anyone else even recognized them. Failure was not part of her vocabulary. Yet today, dozens of investors were watching her lose precious minutes while her flagship vessel refused to leave the dock. "Try it again," she ordered. The chief mechanic pressed the ignition once more. A hollow click echoed through the marina before silence swallowed the sound. Someone quietly muttered that the control module must have failed. Another insisted the wiring harness had somehow shorted overnight. A third suggested canceling the demonstration entirely. Claire exhaled sharply. "So. That's it?" she asked. "Every certified marine mechanic standing here is out of ideas?" No one answered. Beyond the crowd, almost invisible against the rows of maintenance carts and neatly coiled dock lines, a man in faded navy coveralls continued replacing a weathered light fixture along the wooden pier. His movements were calm, practiced, almost peaceful, as though the growing tension surrounding the luxury yacht belonged to another world entirely. Owen Mercer tightened the final bolt, climbed carefully down his ladder, and placed his worn toolbox beside a weathered maintenance cart. His work boots carried traces of paint, salt, and years of honest labor. Most visitors never noticed him. Those who did rarely remembered his face. To nearly everyone at the marina, he was simply the quiet maintenance worker who fixed lights, repaired docks, and kept everything running behind the scenes. Claire finally noticed him standing nearby. Her eyes narrowed before an impatient smile crossed her face. "What about him?" she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Several mechanics turned. One chuckled. Another smirked. Claire pointed toward Owen. "Maybe our maintenance guy wants to give it a shot. After all, if the professionals can't restart a $4 million yacht, perhaps changing light bulbs comes with hidden engineering credentials." A wave of restrained laughter spread through the gathering. Phones slowly lifted into the air, capturing what many assumed would become an amusing moment before the event was inevitably cancelled. Owen looked toward the silent yacht, then toward the crowd, his expression unchanged. He neither defended himself nor reacted to the laughter. Instead, he quietly picked up his old toolbox, brushed a trace of sawdust from its handle, and walked toward the vessel with the same steady pace of a man who had spent a lifetime learning that the loudest voices in the room were rarely the ones worth answering. If this story has you hooked, take a second to subscribe. It really helps the channel. Also, are you Team CEO or Team Single Dad? Let me know in the comments. Now, back to the story. Owen stopped 3 feet from the open engine compartment and rested his weathered toolbox on the teak deck without making a sound. The laughter around him faded into scattered whispers, not because anyone suddenly respected him, but because they were curious enough to watch the maintenance worker embarrass himself. Claire stepped aside with a polite smile that carried more impatience than kindness. You have 5 minutes, she said. After that, we are calling the event. Owen nodded once. May I ask one question? She raised an eyebrow. Go ahead. Has anyone listened to the engine? Several mechanics exchanged puzzled looks before one answered with a confident laugh. We have scanned every system on board. This yacht has the latest diagnostic software available. Owen looked toward the silent engine room instead of the mechanic. That was not my question. A brief silence settled over the dock. The breeze carried the smell of saltwater, polished wood, diesel fuel, and fresh varnish while distant seabirds drifted overhead. Somewhere farther down the marina, halyards tapped softly against aluminum masts in a steady rhythm that almost sounded like a patient heartbeat. Owen climbed carefully into the engine compartment, moving with the confidence of someone entering a familiar conversation rather than confronting an impossible machine. He did not reach for a laptop. He did not unplug electronic modules. He did not remove expensive covers simply to impress the crowd. Instead, he rested one hand lightly against the engine housing and closed his eyes for only a moment. One of the younger mechanics whispered, "What is he doing?" Another shrugged. Putting on a show. Claire folded her arms again, determined not to reveal how desperately she wanted any solution to work. Every passing minute meant investors growing more uncomfortable, reporters collecting awkward photographs, and competitors enjoying the spectacle from neighboring docks. Owen finally opened his eyes and reached into his toolbox. Inside were ordinary tools that had seen years of honest work. Their chrome surfaces had long since lost their shine, and the wooden handle of his favorite wrench had been polished smooth by thousands of hours in steady hands. He selected a simple mechanic stethoscope instead. Several people frowned. Claire looked genuinely confused. You carry one of those? Owen answered without looking up. Sometimes machines tell the truth better than people do. He placed the instrument against different sections of the engine, listening carefully while requesting that one mechanic briefly engage the ignition. The starter clicked. A faint vibration answered before silence returned. Owen repeated the process from another angle, taking his time, never rushing to satisfy the growing audience. His expression remained calm, almost thoughtful, as though he recognized a familiar voice hidden beneath layers of modern technology. Standing near the end of the dock, a young girl watched quietly from behind a maintenance cart, clutching a paperback novel against her chest. Lily Mercer had finished her summer reading program at the local library early that afternoon and had come to wait for her father before they drove home together. She had seen people overlook him many times before. She had heard strangers assume that quiet meant ordinary. Yet she never interrupted because her father had always told her the same thing. Character does not become stronger when everyone believes in you. Character becomes visible when nobody does. She watched him now with complete confidence while everyone else waited for him to fail. The chief mechanic reluctantly reached for the ignition again after Owen gave a small nod. The starter engaged with the same dull click, followed by the same lifeless silence that had frustrated everyone for nearly an hour. Several people sighed in disappointment. One investor glanced at his watch before quietly stepping away to answer a phone call. Another whispered that perhaps the demonstration should simply be postponed. Owen removed the mechanic's stethoscope with unhurried precision and set it carefully back into his toolbox. He leaned farther into the engine compartment, his fingertips brushing lightly across a bundle of neatly organized cables before pausing over a polished section of the fuel delivery assembly. His eyes lingered there for several seconds. He was not looking for broken parts. He was looking for something that did not belong. Claire watched from only a few feet away, trying to read his expression. Unlike the certified mechanics before him, he never appeared frustrated. He never muttered complaints about defective software or blamed the manufacturer. Instead, he observed every component with quiet patience, almost as if he respected the machine enough to let it reveal its own story. One mechanic folded his arms. "You are wasting time," he said. "Every sensor has already been checked twice." Owen looked up calmly. Sometimes every answer is correct except the question being asked. The younger mechanic frowned, uncertain whether he had just been corrected or encouraged. The afternoon sun reflected across the calm water, scattering bright ribbons of light beneath the hull while the warm breeze carried the scent of salt and fresh-cut cedar from a nearby repair dock. Somewhere in the distance a bell buoy rang softly, its steady rhythm blending with the quiet creak of dock lines pulling gently against polished cleats. The marina itself seemed to slow down, as though even the harbor were waiting to see what would happen next. Owen reached for a flashlight no larger than his hand and directed its narrow beam beneath the rear section of the engine. He remained perfectly still for several moments before smiling almost imperceptibly. It was the first change anyone had seen on his face. Claire noticed immediately. "Did you find something?" she asked. Owen answered without triumph or excitement. "I found something that everyone else believed could not be the problem." Several mechanics stepped closer, eager to defend their work. "Impossible," one insisted. "We inspected every visible connection." Owen nodded politely. "You inspected what was easy to see." He extended one finger toward a narrow space deep behind a protective bracket where a tiny linkage sat ever so slightly out of alignment, hidden behind larger components that naturally drew attention first. It was not damaged. It had simply shifted enough to confuse the electronic sequence during startup. Modern diagnostics had continued searching for expensive failures while ignoring one quiet mechanical truth. Owen picked up a small wrench whose chrome had long ago faded from years of honest service. He adjusted the hidden linkage by less than the width of a coin, tightened one fastener with careful pressure, and stepped back without a word. The mechanic stared into the compartment, suddenly realizing that none of them had even looked in that direction. Claire searched Owen's face again, expecting confidence or satisfaction, but found only the same calm humility he had carried from the maintenance dock. He closed the toolbox halfway and looked toward the helm. "Whenever you are ready," he said gently, "please start her one more time." Claire exchanged a quick glance with her chief mechanic before giving a reluctant nod toward the helm. The mechanic inhaled slowly, placed one hand on the ignition controls, and hesitated as though he no longer trusted his own expertise. Every conversation around the dock faded into uneasy silence. Even the investors who had begun drifting away turned back toward the yacht, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. The mechanic turned the key. For a fraction of a second nothing happened. Then a deep mechanical pulse rolled through the hull. Another heartbeat followed, stronger than the first. A rich, steady rumble filled the marina as the twin engines awakened with effortless confidence, their smooth rhythm echoing across the calm water. The polished yacht vibrated gently against its mooring lines before settling into a flawless idle, sounding exactly as it had on the day it first left the shipyard. No warning lights appeared. No alarm sounded. The engine simply ran as though it had never been sick at all. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the low confident hum of precision engineering, the splash of seawater against the dock, and the distant cry of gulls gliding overhead. One investor slowly lowered his sunglasses, unable to hide his surprise. Another quietly slipped his phone back into his pocket without recording another second. Several mechanics leaned over the engine compartment in disbelief, searching for some complicated repair they could explain to themselves. Instead they found only the tiny adjustment Owen had made with a worn wrench that probably cost less than a family dinner. Claire stared at the instrument panel, watching every gauge settle perfectly into its operating range. Oil pressure was exactly where it belonged. Engine temperature climbed with smooth consistency. Every electronic system suddenly reported healthy status. She looked back toward Owen, expecting him to celebrate or at least accept the attention now focused entirely upon him. Instead he simply closed his toolbox, wiped a trace of grease from his fingertips with an old shop towel, and glanced toward the maintenance light fixture he had been repairing before anyone had interrupted his afternoon. "That is impossible," one mechanic whispered. Owen answered quietly. "No. It was overlooked." Another mechanic shook his head. "We checked everything. Owen offered a gentle smile that carried neither pride nor criticism. You checked every expensive possibility. Sometimes the smallest detail asks for the greatest patience. Claire walked a few slow steps closer, studying the man she had dismissed less than 15 minutes earlier. His coveralls were faded from years beneath the coastal sun. His boots showed signs of countless long workdays. There was nothing about his appearance that suggested extraordinary accomplishments, yet nothing about his calm demeanor resembled someone who had simply gotten lucky. "Where did you learn to diagnose engines like that?" she asked softly. Owen paused before answering. Long before computers learned how to listen, engineers had to. His words lingered in the warm afternoon air. They sounded less like a boast than a memory. Claire noticed something she had completely missed earlier. His hands were steady. Not the steady hands of someone confident because he wanted recognition, but the steady hands of someone who had carried enormous responsibility often enough that solving problems had become second nature. Around them, conversations slowly resumed, yet they no longer carried laughter. The mood had changed completely. Respect had quietly replaced amusement, although nobody yet understood why the maintenance worker standing beside the yacht possessed knowledge that an entire team of specialists had failed to match. Farther down the dock, Lily smiled to herself. She had seen that look before. It was the same quiet expression her father always wore whenever someone finally realized that humility and greatness sometimes arrived wearing the very same pair of worn work boots. The chief mechanic slowly closed the engine hatch and looked at Owen with an expression that had completely replaced confidence with curiosity. "I have worked on marine engines for 22 years, he admitted quietly. "I would never have looked there." Owen rested one hand on his toolbox. "Experience teaches us where problems usually hide. Humility reminds us they can hide somewhere else." The words settled over the dock with unexpected weight. Claire found herself studying every detail she had ignored before. His coveralls were clean despite years of use. His tools were organized with remarkable precision. Every wrench had its place. Every screwdriver returned to the same worn leather roll. There was discipline in the smallest things he did. It did not resemble habit. It resembled training. Around the marina, conversations resumed, but the tone had changed completely. The laughter had disappeared, replaced by respectful whispers. Investors who had nearly left moments earlier were now asking questions about the quiet maintenance worker instead of the yacht itself. One elderly gentleman adjusted the brim of his navy blue cap embroidered with the words United States Navy Veteran. He had remained near the back of the crowd throughout the entire incident, saying very little while observing everything. As Owen lifted his toolbox to return to the maintenance dock, the older man froze. His eyes settled on Owen's hands before moving to a small, faded emblem stitched just beneath the shoulder seam of his coveralls. Most people would never have noticed it. Years of washing had nearly erased its colors. The veteran took one careful step forward. Then another. His breathing slowed. "Excuse me," he called gently. Owen turned. The two men looked at each other for several long seconds without speaking. Claire noticed something unusual. Owen's posture changed ever so slightly. Not out of fear or pride, but out of quiet recognition. The older man removed his cap. "This may sound like an odd question," he said. "Did you ever serve aboard the USS Arlington during the humanitarian deployment in the Pacific?" Owen smiled politely. "For a while." The veteran's eyes widened. "Engineering division?" Owen nodded once. "Yes, sir." A silence spread across the dock that felt different from every silence before it. The older man took another step closer. "Lieutenant Commander Owen Mercer." Several mechanics looked at each other in confusion. Claire felt a chill despite the warm coastal air. Owen answered with the same calm voice he had used all afternoon. "Retired now." The veteran laughed softly, almost in disbelief. "Retired, maybe. Forgotten, never." He turned toward the growing crowd. Do any of you know who this man is? Nobody answered. The veteran looked back at Owen before speaking with unmistakable respect. 20 years ago, when our ship lost propulsion halfway across the Pacific Ocean, this officer kept an entire engineering crew working through the night. He solved a failure that specialists from 3 different commands could not diagnose. We made it safely into port because of him. Claire stared at Owen, searching his face for any sign that the story embarrassed or pleased him. She found neither. He simply shifted his toolbox into his other hand as though the conversation belonged to someone else. It was never one person, Owen replied quietly. Ships come home because crews trust each other. The veteran smiled. That sounds exactly like the officer I remember. For the first time since the yacht had come back to life, Claire realized she had not been standing beside an ordinary maintenance worker. She had been standing beside a man who had spent an entire career carrying responsibilities far greater than anyone at the marina could have imagined, and he had never felt the need to tell a single person. The marina remained unusually quiet as the elderly veteran extended his hand. Owen accepted it with a firm but unassuming handshake, the kind shared between people who understood that respect was earned through years of service rather than moments of applause. The older man smiled warmly. You probably do not remember me, he said. Chief Petty Officer Samuel Brooks. We crossed paths twice. Once in Guam and again in Norfolk. Owen searched his face for a moment before recognition slowly appeared. You were supervising the propulsion inspection team. Samuel laughed softly. I was trying to. You were the one who solved the problem. Several people standing nearby leaned closer, sensing that they were hearing pieces of a story no newspaper had ever printed. Claire remained silent. Every assumption she had made that afternoon was quietly falling apart. Samuel turned toward the gathering crowd and spoke with the calm certainty of someone recalling history instead of telling a legend. People think engineers just fix machines. They do not realize the right engineer protects missions, crews, and sometimes thousands of lives without anyone outside the engine room ever knowing. He looked back at Owen. Your team kept aging ships operating all over the world. Every captain wanted you on board because you listened before you touched anything. Owen lowered his eyes for a brief moment. I had excellent teachers. Samuel smiled. You became one yourself. A younger mechanic stepped forward, unable to hide his curiosity. If someone with your background worked on naval ships, why are you here changing dock lights and repairing handrails? The question hung gently in the warm afternoon air. No one considered it disrespectful. Everyone genuinely wanted to understand. Owen rested his toolbox beside his feet before answering. Because life changes. His voice remained steady. After my wife passed away, my daughter needed a father more than the Navy needed another engineer. Retirement allowed me to keep my promise to her. He glanced toward the end of the dock where Lily still stood quietly with her book held against her chest. Their eyes met for only a second, yet the small smile they exchanged said more than a long explanation ever could. Samuel followed Owen's gaze and nodded with understanding. I remember hearing about your retirement. Most people thought you left. Because another company offered more money. Owen shook his head gently. Time was worth more. The surrounding crowd grew even quieter. Investors who measured success by expanding portfolios suddenly found themselves listening to a man who measured success by evenings spent with his daughter. Claire felt an unfamiliar heaviness in her heart. She had spent years building a company, believing every hour belonged to the next achievement, yet the quiet maintenance worker standing before her had willingly walked away from one of the most respected engineering careers imaginable for something he believed mattered more. The realization humbled her far more deeply than the repaired yacht ever could. A soft breeze drifted across the marina, carrying the scent of saltwater and sun-warmed cedar while the yacht continued idling with effortless precision behind them. It almost seemed symbolic, as though the vessel itself had become part of a lesson no one expected to learn that day. Owen reached for his toolbox once again. If everything is running properly now, I should finish replacing the lights before sunset," he said. There was no desire for recognition in his voice, no expectation of praise, only the quiet satisfaction of leaving something better than he had found it. As he turned toward the dock, Claire realized that the greatest strength she had witnessed that afternoon was not his extraordinary knowledge of engines. It was the remarkable humility of a man who had every reason to boast and had chosen silence instead. Claire watched Owen walk toward the weathered maintenance ladder as though the extraordinary moment had already ended for him. Around her, executives resumed discussing contracts, mechanics reopened tool cases, and investors congratulated one another on the successful demonstration, yet none of them seemed able to stop looking in his direction. The marina felt different now. The same sunlight reflected across the water. The same gentle waves rocked the yachts against their mooring lines. But the atmosphere had shifted from restless urgency to quiet respect. Claire finally stepped forward. "Mr. Mercer." Owen stopped and turned with the same calm expression he had worn since the beginning of the afternoon. "Yes, ma'am." She hesitated. It had been years since she had struggled to find the right words. Negotiating multi-million-dollar agreements had always come naturally to her. Apologizing did not. "I owe you more than a thank you," she said honestly. "I judged you before I knew anything about you." Owen smiled gently. "Most people judge what they can see. It is human nature." Claire lowered her eyes for a brief moment. "That does not make it right." The breeze carried the faint scent of the ocean as a line of white clouds drifted slowly across the brilliant blue sky. Somewhere farther down the harbor, a sailboat eased away from its slip while the polished yacht behind them continued idling with perfect confidence, every vibration smooth and steady as though reminding everyone that quiet precision rarely demanded attention. Samuel Brooks stepped beside Claire and reached into the inside pocket of his light jacket. He unfolded an old photograph that had softened with age from years of careful handling. Several people leaned closer. The picture showed the engineering crew aboard a naval vessel many years earlier. Faces were younger. Uniforms were crisp. Salt spray covered the deck behind them. Samuel pointed toward a familiar face standing in the second row. "There he is." Claire accepted the photograph carefully. The younger Owen stood among the crew with the same composed posture he carried today. There were no medals displayed. No attempt to stand in front. He had chosen a place slightly behind the others, allowing the crew around him to fill the center of the frame. Samuel smiled. That was after an overseas deployment that lasted almost 9 months. The commanding officer wanted to recognize the engineering team because several major repairs had been completed without delaying a single mission. One mechanic quietly asked, "Was Lieutenant Commander Mercer in charge?" Samuel nodded. "Officially, yes. Unofficially, he made everyone around him better." The best leaders rarely need to remind people they are leading. Claire continued studying the photograph before looking back toward the man now carrying a faded toolbox instead of wearing a Navy uniform. She realized the same qualities had never disappeared. The uniform had changed. The character had not. She walked toward Lily, who still waited patiently near the maintenance cart. "You must be very proud of your father," Claire said softly. Lily smiled with the quiet confidence only a daughter could have. "I always have been. The only difference is that today everyone else finally caught up." Claire felt those words settle deeply within her heart. Success had taught her how to recognize talent. This afternoon had taught her something far more valuable. True greatness was often hidden behind ordinary clothes, simple routines, and humble choices. It did not announce itself. It simply revealed itself when someone needed it most, and then it quietly returned to work as though nothing remarkable had happened at all. The demonstration cruise began only a few minutes later, and the yacht slipped gracefully away from the dock with its engines humming as smoothly as polished violins. Investors smiled once again, cameras flashed, and conversations shifted from mechanical failure to future opportunities. Yet Claire found that she was no longer thinking about contracts or expansion plans. Her attention remained fixed on the quiet figure at the far end of the marina, where Owen had already climbed his ladder and returned to replacing the weathered light fixture he had left unfinished earlier that afternoon. It was as though restoring a $4 million yacht had simply been another interruption in an ordinary workday. Claire stood motionless for several moments before making a decision that surprised even herself. She crossed the dock without assistance, without executives following behind her, and without the confident stride that usually announced her arrival. When she reached the ladder, she waited until Owen stepped carefully back onto the wooden pier. "May I ask you something?" she said. Owen set his screwdriver back into its place inside the toolbox and nodded. "Of course." Claire looked at the worn tools before speaking. "With your experience, your education, and everything I have learned today, you could be leading engineering divisions anywhere in the country. Why stay here?" Owen glanced across the harbor where Lily sat reading quietly on a nearby bench, the afternoon sun warming the pages of her book while gentle waves reflected silver light beneath the docks. A small smile crossed his face. "Because this marina lets me finish work before dinner." Claire looked puzzled. Owen continued softly. "Every evening my daughter and I cook together. On Fridays we stop for ice cream before driving home. On Saturdays we volunteer at the community food pantry. Those moments disappear faster than careers do." Claire listened without interrupting. She had spent years believing success required sacrificing nearly everything else. Hearing someone describe an ordinary evening with greater pride than a decorated military career challenged something deep inside her. "Do you ever miss the Navy?" she asked. Owen considered the question carefully. "I miss the people. I miss solving difficult problems with remarkable teams. But I have never regretted choosing to be present for my daughter. Children only grow up once." At that moment Lily closed her book and walked toward them. "Dad, I finished the last chapter," she said with an excited smile. Owen's face brightened instantly. "Already? Then you will have to tell me all about it on the drive home." Claire noticed how naturally his attention shifted. The man who had quietly solved a problem that had defeated specialists moments earlier now seemed even happier discussing a novel with his daughter. There was no performance, no attempt to impress anyone. It was simply who he was. Claire reached into her pocket and removed a business card embossed with the company seal. "I would like to offer you the position of Chief Engineering Advisor for Whitmore Maritime Holdings," she said sincerely. "The salary, schedule, and responsibilities can be designed around your family. I am not asking because you repaired my yacht. I am asking because I believe every organization becomes stronger when it is guided by someone whose character is as dependable as his knowledge." Owen accepted the card politely, looked at it for a brief moment, then slipped it carefully into his shirt pocket. "Thank you," he said warmly. "I will think about it." There was no excitement in his voice, no rush to seize an opportunity others would have considered life-changing. He simply valued every decision by the same quiet standard that had shaped the rest of his life. Watching him walk beside Lily toward the parking lot, Claire finally understood that the strongest foundations were never built from wealth, titles, or recognition. They were built from promises faithfully kept, one ordinary day at a time. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the marina in soft shades of gold and amber as the last of the guests departed with satisfied smiles and signed agreements tucked beneath their arms. The crisis that had threatened the entire afternoon had quietly become a story people would tell for years, yet the man responsible for changing its ending was nowhere near the celebration. Owen and Lily walked side by side toward their aging pickup truck parked beneath a row of swaying palm trees. His weathered toolbox rested in one hand while Lily carried her favorite book in the other. They spoke about the story she had just finished, laughed over a funny scene she wanted to read aloud again at home, and discussed whether they should make homemade chili or grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner. There was no mention of luxury yachts, investors, or remarkable discoveries. To them, it had simply been another day that ended together. Behind them, Claire remained standing at the edge of the dock long after everyone else had gone. The polished yacht floated peacefully in its slip, its engines cooling with quiet metallic clicks that blended into the evening sounds of the harbor. She looked down at the business card holder in her hand before realizing one card was missing. For the first time in many years, she found herself hoping someone would take time before accepting one of her offers. She understood now that the most valuable people were never motivated by titles alone. They chose purpose before prestige, family before applause, and character before recognition. Samuel Brooks stepped beside her, placing his navy cap back on his head. "You are thinking about him," he said with a knowing smile. Claire nodded. "I spent the entire afternoon believing I was the one evaluating people. I never realized I was the one being taught." Samuel looked toward the parking lot where Owen's old pickup slowly pulled away. "The finest officers I ever served with all shared one thing in common. They never needed anyone to know how important they were." Claire watched the truck disappear beyond the marina entrance until only the fading sunlight remained. Several weeks passed before a handwritten envelope arrived at Whitmore Maritime Holdings. Inside was the business card Claire had given Owen with a short note written in careful script. "Thank you for your kindness and your generous offer. I would be honored to help as a consultant one afternoon each week, provided I can still be home in time for dinner with my daughter. Respectfully, Owen Mercer." Claire smiled as she read the final sentence a second time. She accepted every condition without changing a single word. Over the months that followed, Owen quietly helped improve systems throughout the company. He never asked for a larger office because he never requested one at all. He never introduced himself by mentioning military service or past accomplishments. Most new employees assumed he was simply a thoughtful engineer with extraordinary patience. Those who worked beside him soon discovered something much greater. He listened before speaking. He taught before correcting. He praised others before accepting credit himself. Years later, whenever young engineers asked Claire what qualities she looked for when hiring leaders, she always gave the same answer. "Find the person who does the right thing when nobody is watching. Skills can be taught. Character cannot." And somewhere beyond the marina, an old pickup still carried a father and daughter home before sunset, reminding anyone willing to see that the strongest engines are not always found beneath polished decks, and the greatest heroes are often the quiet people who never feel the need to tell the world who they once were, because true dignity does not demand attention. It simply earns respect, one humble act at a time. Thanks for spending your time with us today. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel. And I'm curious, how old are you, and did this story feel relatable to you? Let me know in the comments. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.